So we will record this session like normal. I forgot to record last week's class, and then, I meant to do it and record my Friday classes session. So this way we can have a recording of last week's class. And I almost forgot. I actually started my lecture, and then someone thankfully reminded me. So I almost lost the recording twice last week. But we have it, it's uploaded. Okay. Let me just. All right, so today we are talking about human resource management. So we are up to chapter 9. So moving right along. And this is on the agenda for today. So let's go through a quick review. And then we're going to talk about strategic human resource management, which basically is about recruitment, selection, so recruiting employees, compensating them. We'll talk about other aspects of this in the pre-recorded section, like the legalities surrounding it and training and things like that. But these are the topics that we're going to cover for today. So just to review, and I know we did this sort of last week, but I think I'm going to make it a point to sort of review each week as we go along to make sure that some of these like more important concepts are getting drilled in. But so in the early part of the semester, we talked about the planning process of management. And if you recall, we established a strategy, right? That was the plan that we made. And the strategy is sort of like a grand vision for the direction that you want the company to head. And then each of the business units are going to establish their own strategies that are more specific to their business. And then, so once the plan is established, now we need to organize the people and the resources in order to achieve the objectives set out in our plan. And so that's the section that we started since the midterm, which is sort of the second element of this process of management. And so within organizing, we talked about 2 ways in which to organize the people and resources so that the company can accomplish the plan objectives, the plan goals. And so one of the ways is through culture, right? Which is the values, rituals, symbols, socialization, et cetera, that create a sort of like a company identity, a company personality that drives the assumptions about how work gets done. And I use sort of the dramatic example in a cult, in a religious cult, to illustrate how powerful an impact the culture can have on behavior. And so that's used to motivate employees to accomplish the plan goals. In the pre-recorded lecture, I talked about structure, so the different kinds of companies that you can establish are for-profit, nonprofit, mutual benefit. And then I talked about different types of organizational structures that you can set up, such as simple structure, functional structure, and divisional structure. Divisional can be done in a lot of different ways. You can divide a company organization along where you group workers according to, let's say, the type of customers that they handle, or the type of, or the geographical area. So you can divide your workers along those kinds of lines. And so these are different ways to structure an organization. And the purpose of this is to create a particular kind of structure and to create a particular kind of culture that's aligned with the strategic goals of the company. And so those are 2 ways in which we organize the people and resources to do that. And so today we're going to introduce a 3rd way. And that 3rd way is human resource management. And this is about employees. Now, human resource management or a human resource department, it used to be referred to as a personnel department, but now they are referred to as human resource departments. And as the textbook points out, this is not a cosmetic change. This is a change to recognize the value that employees have for an organization. And so you might think that, well, referring to people as resources might be sort of like a downgrade, you know, in their stand-in, but it's really not. It's to recognize that it's to recognize their importance, right? And the value that they serve, the value that they bring to the company in order for the company to achieve its goals. And so human resource management is defined here as consists of the activities managers perform to plan for, attract, develop, and retain an effective workforce, right? So it's all about hiring the right kinds of employees, figuring out what kind of employees you need, developing those employees so that they are very effective at their job, and making sure you retain them, right? You don't lose them out to the competition. And so I think one of the thrust and focus of this chapter is really to highlight the importance of people. This may seem obvious, but I don't know. I mean, if you look at what gets a lot of press today is the technology that companies use, right? And so if you look at like a modern company or a modern factory, you know, they use lots of very sophisticated machinery, right? So machinery, computerization, right? The technology that companies use, all of that is emphasized, and the importance of machinery and computers is constantly made clear. There was actually a report that recently came out. I don't know if this came across your radar, but Oxford University came out with a study that suggests that 40% of all workers will be automated in the near future. And so on the one hand, it shows how far our technology has come and the importance of that, right? But on the other hand, it would make you believe that, you know, human beings are increasingly becoming less and less important, right? And so one example of this, I think, is Elon Musk, and we talked about this during, I think, week 2, operations management. So Elon Musk, he's focused on what he calls the machine that makes the machine, which is creating a factory system that's so efficient that it minimizes the need for human labor, right? And so he can maximize the output of his factories, and he can maximize the number of cars that he produces by using the most sophisticated machinery and robots and automating all of the tasks that human beings perform. But what he found out is that that goes a little bit too far. There's a limit to how much machines can do. And it actually detracted from his performance. And so he was able to, it actually prevented him from achieving his goals. It made him produce less cars because he had an over-reliance on machinery. And, you know, there's a limit to the capabilities machines have, and they can't just automate everything that human beings can do. And so I think given all of this, I think people tend to lose sight of the fact that human beings, employees are very important to organizations. And in fact, the textbook makes the point, what I think is important to highlight, and that is that human beings are actually your most important resource. And so I would emphasize that 100%, despite all the technology that we have, despite all the automation, the AI, the machinery, 100% of our production still comes from human beings. If we were to fire all of our workers, right, productivity eventually would hit zero. And so machines and all of this technology could be thought of really as a tool that human beings make use of. It makes us more productive. But really what's most important within organizations is the people that it hires. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Karl Marx. Does that name ring a bell for anyone? He's he's a historical figure. Yeah, so we got a yes. Communism. Do we know who Karl Marx is? Do we know anything about him? Okay, seems like we got a few yeses. So you've heard the name. He's very controversial, right? So Karl Marx, very important figure in history because he's probably the preeminent critic of capitalism. And so anyways, he had this theory about history, that history follows a certain kind of trajectory. And what he predicted, given his theory, yeah, definitely you would learn about him in sociology. He's one of sort of the founders of like a modern scientific sociology. So he's typically part of that group of founders of sociology. Credited for communism, yes. So his theory, that's exactly right. So he has this theory of history, that history follows a certain kind of trajectory. And given his theory of history, he predicted that eventually capitalism would fall, that it would no longer become viable. And he had these predictions where he would say that society, first started with primitive communism, then it went to feudalism, and then eventually that feudalism was no longer workable, and so then you had capitalism. And so he predicts that capitalism at some point in the future will no longer become workable, and it will be replaced with something that he calls communism. And this is a very controversial term, communism, because there are lots of countries that adopted a communist political philosophy, and they try to adopt a particular kind of economic system that would sort of quicken the pace to communism. So the Soviet Union, so there was a revolution in Russia based on the ideas of Karl Marx, and that's what gave rise to the Soviet Union. It gave rise, the ideas of Karl Marx gave rise to communist China. Anyways, the point of this is that the main idea of his theory of history is that capitalism, and I point this out because Karl Marx is a very important figure. His ideas, I think, are important to consider, and he's often misrepresented. And so one of the sort of central ideas of his theory of history is that eventually the machinery, the technology developed within capitalism would replace all of human labor, right? And so automation would eventually get to the point where we no longer had to work. We can have machines do the work for us. And the problem with that, of course, is that the system of capitalism, which relies on wage labor in order to operate, would collapse. Because if you didn't have workers, right, you weren't paying people to work, people didn't have income in order to purchase the products that companies would produce. And companies make profit off of the value that workers, human beings, produce. And if there's no longer human beings producing any value because it's all produced by machines, there's no source of profit. And so his basic idea is that eventually we're going to get to the point where technology is so powerful that it replaces a lot of the human labor that's necessary. And this will require a new kind of system. And he termed that system communism. He thought that it would be a benefit to society. It would improve society significantly. I think that these ideas are valid to consider. I think that is a direction that we are headed in. But I think that that's in the distant future, right? And so I don't know that China is going to realize a communist society in our lifetime. Certainly the Soviet Union wasn't able to realize it. I think that technology is way off. And the point of this is to emphasize that what we have to deal with is human beings. And so if we want effective organizations, right, we need to make sure that we are making the most of human beings. So human resource management is this sort of approach that considers human beings, employees, as the most valued resource that an organization has. And so given that, there's a couple of terms that I think are important to know that I have up here on the slide. So human capital, that is the economic or productive potential of employee knowledge, experience, and actions, right? And so it's just to emphasize that human beings bring value to a company, and that value is determined by the knowledge that they have, the experience that they're able to develop, and how effective they are at their job. And so an important consideration, I think, for the management of your human resources is if you want to improve on the capital, on the value that humans, that employees bring to an organization, you want to increase, you want to improve upon their knowledge, right? You want to give them an opportunity to experience work in a way that improves their skills, that develops their skills. And so that, I think that's important to sort of, to point out. The other term I think is important to know is knowledge worker. That's someone whose occupation is principally concerned with generating or interpreting information as defined on the slide, as opposed to manual labor. And so one of the shifts in a modern developed economy, particularly in the United States, we over the past century or so, we shifted from a workforce that was largely driven by manual labor to one that makes use of your brains, right? And so jobs that require manual labor were replaced by these knowledge workers. So most people who work today in the US are knowledge workers. They're making use of their brains more so than their muscle. So things like training and knowledge, learning are very important parts of making sure that you're getting the most of your workforce. And the last element here, social capital. And so this is the economic or productive value that comes from strong trust and cooperative relationships. And this is an important sort of skill that I think employees need to develop, being able to work well with others. I think we talked a little bit about this in week one, where we highlighted that employees believe that this is an important skill, employers rather, believe that this is an important skill their employees must have, but it's a skill that they're lacking in, right? And so this is actually something that you can develop. This is something that I encourage you on your own to develop. It's important to be able to sort of demonstrate these skills if you want to get hired for a job and to be promoted. So to do well, at your job, social capital, I think, is an important aspect that needs to be developed. And this is something that you can work on your own to help with your own sort of career progression. So the strategic human resource management process is illustrated in this diagram here. And no surprise, the strategy that you develop for your workforce needs to be aligned with your company's mission and vision. It needs to be aligned with the strategies that your company has developed. And this is sort of a recurrent theme as we talk about these different topics, right? So it also illustrates the importance of a company's mission and vision, right? Everything is derived from it. This is not just, something, someone who took an MBA class or a business course, decided to write up for a company, and then it gets filed, in a drawer someplace, and no one ever refers to it. But rather, really, this is part of the founding documents that create the direction for a company. So they're very important, and everything is deduced from it, right? So everything has to be sort of aligned with that initial vision and values that are established for a company. And then from that, the strategies are going to be developed, including your strategy for human resources. So it's all sort of aligned. So what is it that you do when you're creating a strategy for human resources? Well, a couple of the things that you do is you want to understand your current employee needs, and then you need to predict what those needs are going to be in the future. So we'll address each of these. Is there any questions before we move forward about the basic idea of human resource management or the importance of people? Do you have a critique of Karl Marx and communism? That usually provokes a lot of commentary. No, good. Okay, so so as part of your human resource strategy, right, one of the first things you need to do is you need to understand your current employee needs. And these are the things that you're going to do that. One of them is a job analysis, and that's literally like you're going to look at how people perform their jobs, right? And you're going to look at the different elements of their job and how they accomplish the tasks that they're engaged in. And then from that, you're going to write up a description, which summarizes everything that they do, and then write up a job specification. And job specification are sort of the requirements, the minimum requirements necessary for someone to perform that job, right? And so one of the strategies that we talked about as an example was Facebook, right? And if you recall, we talked about how Facebook has now a VR strategy, right? That they want to connect 1 billion users in virtual reality. So in order to achieve their objectives within that strategy, one of the things that they want to do is they want to progress the technology, right? The technology is pretty crude at this point. These are some of the things that we talked about. And so some of the jobs that they need in order to realize this strategy are people who maybe do optics, right? Who work on digital displays. And this may be all new to Facebook, right? So their human resource strategy needs to get an understanding of the kind of jobs that are necessary in order for them to realize their goals, right? And to improve upon the VR devices that they are trying to develop. And so this is one way you can do that, right? You need to understand the work, let's say, someone who is in optics does, right? So you can hire them. And so the other thing you want to do is you want to predict future employment needs. Your competitive landscape is constantly evolving, right? So your company is going to evolve along with it to meet all of the new challenges it faces, right? And so that may prompt changes, that will likely prompt changes in your employment needs. And so you need to be able to, as part of a human resource management strategy, to predict what your future employee needs are going to be. And part of that is taking an inventory of what your current employment looks like, right? And so that will just be like a report listing all of your organization's employees, where you list, who they are and what they're capable of and what roles they serve. So once you establish, right, what these needs are, the next step in your strategic process is to actually fill those needs, right? And so in order to do that, you need to recruit people, and then you need to select who you want to hire among those candidates that you recruit. And so the first part of this process, recruitment, is just locating, attracting qualified applicants for the jobs that are open in your organization. Your textbook mentions a statistic: 5% of the workforce produces 26% of your output, right? So the idea is that a small percentage of your employees will be responsible for a large percentage of the actual output. And I'm just wondering if that's a statistic that rings true for any of you in your past experience, maybe some job that you worked at where there were like a few sort of star employees that you found were responsible for most of the work, or would you say that everyone sort of equally contributed? Yeah, we're getting a yes. Yeah, or even if you haven't worked a job, even like your experience working, let's say, on group projects. Have you worked on group projects where maybe, there was a few slackers and a lot of what you've accomplished in there was maybe the result of one or two students? Yeah, I think there's a sort of a free rider. Yeah, and so that's part of the issue. I think that's part of the issue of group projects among students. You always have that free rider problem. Yeah, and at work, without question. And so, yeah, I mean, so they did a study that confirms this, and I think it will probably ring true for most of you in your work experience, that you will find that there'll be sort of like a few stars that are responsible for a large percentage of what your organization gets done. And so what are the implications now for your human resource management strategy? The implications are that maybe you can do a better job at hiring the right people, right? Ideally, you would want a company staffed entirely of stars. And so this is part of the challenge. Part of the challenge is recognizing who these stars are going to be, right? And so how do we do that? Well, it's not easy. But so some of the things we'll get into here, but so the first step in that process is recruitment. And you want to generate a pool of applicants that you can draw from in deciding who you are going to hire. And so there are two places that you can generally look when you're looking to hire someone. You can look internally, right? So that's just promoting people from within your organization. So you want to look at, and this is obviously more relevant to larger organizations, but you might want to look at, when you're looking to fill a particular job, who is it that you currently have among your workforce, and maybe you could promote someone internally. The alternative to that, obviously, is to look externally to the organization. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those strategies. And they're listed here. So some of the advantages from recruiting within is, you know what you're getting, right? So there are fewer risks. You already have a track record that you can refer to with this worker. And so there's a lot less risk involved in hiring them for that position. Let's see, some of the disadvantages, though, is that sort of it limits the diversity of thinking within your organization, right? And so this worker, this employee, is likely already socialized to the culture of the company, the values, and the work processes that they have in place. And so they may not bring in a lot of fresh sort of new viewpoints. So that's one of the disadvantages of hiring within, perpetuates groupthink, things like that. One of the advantages of going external is that, look, you can tap into some new knowledge, new experience so that you can expand the capabilities of your organization. But it's very expensive to hire people, right? It's a long drawn out process and there's a lot of risk that comes with it. So those are sort of the advantages and disadvantages of going inside or outside of your organization. What methods are most effective? So actually, some of the most effective ways of recruiting potential employees is through employee referrals. And the reason why is because if an existing employee at the company is going to recommend someone, they don't want to risk their reputation, right? So it's unlikely that they're going to recommend someone who's going to be a failure, right? Or who's going to be a bad worker, right? Because their reputation is on the line, right? Their judgment, they want their judgment to reflect well within the organization of the kind of worker they are, right? And so they're likely not going to recommend someone who's going to be very risky. And also they have a pretty good understanding of what's sort of needed to fill that position, right? And so they'll be pretty good at analyzing whether the person that they're recommending would actually be a good fit or not. So that's actually a very effective way of filling roles. Look into your existing employees and see what kind of recommendations they have. Another way is using recruitment tools. So LinkedIn is probably the most popular. And so as you begin your job search, it's imperative that you have a LinkedIn profile. So I encourage everyone to make use of that. Almost all employees are going to expect it. And so it's important that you establish a profile and know how to make good use of that. So that's important to do. Another technique that's used is something called a realistic job preview. And this is a way of, once you hire someone, making sure they stick around with the job. And so a realistic job preview is just, all that means is it's just you're given a very realistic view of what the job is. So you're not just selling all of the benefits of the job, but you're also mentioning some of the challenges and drawbacks of doing that job are, so that they don't have an unrealistic expectation of what the job is. And so by being realistic on what the actual job is like, it actually increases employee retention. You don't want to go through all of the work of looking for an employee and hiring someone and then have them leave in a couple of weeks, right? And then you got to start the process all over again. So one way to prevent that is to give candidates a realistic view of what the job is like. And one way you can do that is actually have them do the work, right? And so your textbook, I think, has an example where a hotel chain, when they're hiring housekeepers, they actually have potential job applicants do the work, right? Where they make a bed, they clean a room, and they can see some of the challenges that there are in actually doing that job. It may be too physical, for some people. So that's a way of increasing employee retention. Let me see where we are on time. I think we're pretty good. Okay, so I want to show this video. And I just want to. So hopefully you can hear it. So this is about certain kinds of traits that companies look for in candidates for jobs that they're looking to fill.
You wouldn't land an interview at Amazon or Google if you didn't have the skills. But do you have the right personality to get an offer? Every year, LinkedIn pores over its database to determine where people really, really want to work to create its top companies list. This year, Amazon knocked Google out of first place, and the rest of the list reads like a who's who of big tech and strong growth. But let's not kid ourselves. Earning a spot at one of these companies is like winning the lottery. No, really. Last year, Amazon received 5 million resumes and currently has 12,000 open jobs. So what's the winning formula? Here are the 3 special qualities top company hiring managers say they look for during the interview process. You've got to be a true believer in the company's mission and values, and not just with lip service. Your interview has to prove you have deep familiarity with the company's heart and soul, its past and future. And you need to make it clear that you're mission-driven. You don't work to live, you live to work, in particular for a company with a purpose. Kind of laid back? Show yourself the door now. Top companies are looking for people with intensity to spare. Tesla is a company where excellence is a passing grade. Facebook wants its people to be bold and move fast. Top companies want candidates who are bursting with ideas, energy, and self-confidence. So bring your A game to the interview, as in type A. Most of the top companies aren't tech, but surprise, they say they only want people who love people, as in customers, colleagues, and employees. That's why top companies use their interviews to look for empathy, kindness, collegiality, and authenticity. They want to see your humanity with a capital H. Now, we all know top companies are notoriously hard to break into, but with the right combination of skills and personality traits, you've got a shot. And not only at the Amazons and Googles of the world, but just about anywhere you'd care to work.
So I don't know if you have any comments on that. A couple of things I would highlight, though. First of all, I think they point out the importance that companies place on their mission and vision, right? And so when they're hiring employees, they want to make sure that you understand what that mission and vision is, right? And that you're passionate about it as well, because those are the kinds of people they're looking for. They're looking people to carry the company forward along those lines. Yeah, and then another point, the humanity point. Humanity, but work, think like a machine. So perhaps you were a little bit cynical. Yeah, I mean, look, companies will talk about, the human aspect of the workplace, but at the end of the day, right, they have these sort of financial objectives that they need to meet, right? And often the humanity aspect of your job is sacrifice, in pursuit of sort of financial goals and productivity. And this is one of the challenges of being an effective manager, right? Is how you can, achieve your goals without sacrificing the human aspects of work. And it's not easy, right? This is one of the chief difficulties in running a company. Right, yes. But no, I think you make an excellent point. It's certainly a valid point. This is true of companies. That's sort of the balance that you need to establish. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy. I think though what this video highlights is that at these companies, and these are some of the most desired companies to work for, they do certainly place value on your social capital, right? And so what I would suggest, right, when you are pursuing a job and you're in that phase where you're on a job hunt and you're interviewing with companies, you want to emphasize your social capital. And so you want to emphasize these kind of values and these points. You certainly want to know their mission and vision of the company you're interviewing with, and show how you are passionate about it and how you want to contribute to it. But you want to not only emphasize the skills that you have, but these social aspects. And you want to do it in a way where you use examples, right? You just don't want to say that you're great in working with others. You want to give examples. And so all of these features about yourself that highlight the social capital that you have, you want to always prove that through examples that, in your past work or even just, even if you don't have an extensive work history, in other aspects of your life, working as a student, et cetera. So that's key, because that's something that, especially these large companies and these companies that take seriously creating a positive workplace, these are values and skills and features that they emphasize and that they're going to look for among any candidates that they're going to consider. So you have a list of candidates. To select from. And what's the next step? And the next step is obviously to choose among them who you want to hire. And so the selection process has 3 components: background information. So this is the kind of information that you would get from, let's say, a resume. And then you want to conduct interviews to get further information about these candidates. And in some instances, you want to maybe administer employment tests. So we'll just talk a little bit about each of these. So interviews, there are 2 types. There are unstructured interviews and structured interviews. So an unstructured interview is just an interview that just lacks structure, right? And so there's no fixed set of questions, right? And there's no systematic scoring procedure. This has pros and cons to it. So the con is that it could be very subjective, right? If there's no systematic procedure, how do you compare one candidate to the other? That's difficult to do, especially when you don't have this sort of formal sort of systematic scoring system. The other thing is that there's a lot of regulations around hiring workers and hiring employees. And you don't want to run afoul of those regulations, right? And so you have to be very conscious and aware of the kinds of questions that you ask, right? You don't want to violate their privacy, and certainly you don't want to discriminate, let's say, on the basis of disability or race or gender or anything like that. So you have to be very careful about the kinds of questions that you ask. But one of the benefits is that when it's unstructured, you can probe in a way that really gives you a better sense of that person's personality, right? So you might be able to better assess the social capital that they have, whether they will be able to be, to work well within the organization. So that's some of the benefits. The alternative to a unstructured interview, of course, is a structured interview where you ask all of the applicants the same questions. This makes it easier, obviously, to compare one applicant against the next. And there's a couple of different kinds of ways you can do this. One type is called a situational interview. And this is something where they present you with hypothetical situations. So a lot of companies will actually use this method. And so they'll give you a hypothetical situation and ask how you might respond to it. And this can test lots of things. It can test your behavior. It can test your skills. They might give you a hypothetical sort of work scenario and ask you to sort of, like if you're a product manager, right? They may ask you hypothetically, and you're, let's say, interviewing with Google, and you're applying for a product management job. They may ask you, tell me about a new feature that you would add to Gmail, let's say. And so they want to see your thought process in how you might approach that problem. And they'll ask everyone that same question. And this is a way of gauging, who might be better at that job when comparing among the different applicants. Or they might ask you, examples of ways in which you performed in the past. And I would argue that regardless of whether they ask you for examples of how you performed in the past, you want to offer that up, right? You always want to, you don't want to make claims. You don't merely want to make claims about some of the positive aspects of yourself. You always want to back up those claims with examples, with examples of way in which you demonstrated, right, that positive feature about yourself, the way you're able to work well with others, or etc., or the skills that you have. So, but as was pointed out in the comments, all this can be very difficult to do, right? I mean, how accurate can we be in assessing someone's personality, in assessing someone's behavioral traits? Can we really determine whether one person will perform better than the other, right? This is not sort of an easy thing to do, right? It's a challenge. This is part of the challenge in establishing a human resource management strategy. But lo and behold, there's technology on the front to help us with this process. And so I think we have, yes, we do have enough time where I can play this. So I thought that this was really interesting. And so this is, so look, eventually, if we are going to realize, or if Karl Marx's prediction about a communist future replacing our current capitalist system, if that's going to be realized, if that's going to come true, one way to do that, one way that's going to happen is we need something like artificial intelligence to be able to replace not only the sort of manual labor that human beings do, but the cognitive tasks that we perform as well. And AI has been developing significantly in the past few years. It's made sort of leaps and bounds in its abilities. This has gotten everyone enthusiastic about its, ability to sort of replace so much of the work that we do. Enthusiastic in the sense that it would free us from the drudgery of work. Of course, there's challenges that come along with that. When people are, when their jobs are getting replaced by computers, they're unemployed, right? And in a capitalist society, it's difficult to survive when you are unemployed. But nonetheless, AI is making enormous progress. Eventually, it will be able to perform any cognitive task that a human can perform. We are not quite there yet. We are headed there. Who knows when we will reach that singularity, as some futurists describe it, where AI is able to do everything that a human can do and more. We are well on our way. And this is an example of how AI can be used in the interview process. And so I think that you'll find this interesting.
Chae Jung-yo is practicing for a job interview. But when the big day comes, he'll be the only person in the room. He'll turn on a computer at his home, and artificial intelligence will watch and listen to Chae very closely.
There is this fear of the AI interview.
Oh, hold on.
Because most people have never taken it.
AI pioneer Midas IT has introduced an online system it says makes recruiting more efficient. An AI bot uses a combination of facial recognition and voice analysis to tell if someone's nervous or lying. Online games with the bot determine if a candidate is passionate, sincere, or a quick thinker.
Humans aren't always the best judge of this or that, so we use AI to create an objective guideline for hiring.
According to job recruiting firm Career, the most common AI programs grade resumes and review essays for signs of plagiarism. It says about 1/3 of South Korea's top 30 companies plan to introduce some kind of AI recruiting in the next 5 years, and about 20% of mid-sized firms will do the same. But officials at Career have concerns about the latest trends in AI recruiting.
If AI is able to read emotions, people will try to change their personality to fit the test. There will be more hiring errors because a company won't actually know someone's true character.
For now, Midas's system has learned to read Korean expressions and mannerisms. But the company plans to expand its database and release the software abroad. As Chae practices, he's calm and speaking polite Korean. But he admits he's saying what he thinks the company wants to hear. It's up to AI to sniff out whether he's telling the truth. Despite those criticisms, Midas says the AI interview is just one part of the hiring process and humans still make the final decision, at least for now. Bruce Harrison, TRT World, Pyeongtaek, South Korea.
So, I don't know what your thoughts are. Yes, exactly. It is, and this is, I believe, the future that we are headed toward. You know, computers and the use of artificial intelligence, you know, they're developing capabilities that rival the capabilities of human cognition, human intelligence, and in many ways exceed it, right? And so this is an example where, you know, technology might be able to pick up on things about people that a human can't, and able to better predict the kind of personality that a person has. You know, they had mentioned, well, doesn't that mean that they will just sort of trick the AI, right, by faking, you know, their responses to, you know, any question that they're asked, so that, you know, they deliver what, you know, the AI is expecting, or they perform in a way that enables them to do well on the test. I think the key, though, is, right, yeah, and so you might as well interview someone with a polygraph. So the thing is that this is a very interesting point that you bring up, because in AI, you know, you could imagine that if an AI is able to detect your personality, right, accurately, given your response to certain questions, it probably won't be able to eventually develop the capability to detect whether you're being misleading or not, right? And so, you know, it's unlikely that someone would agree to be hooked up to a polygraph. But, you know, when AI has the capabilities of detecting whether you're lying or not, and there's a ton of research in this area, you don't need to plug someone into, you know, 50 different wires and hook them up to this polygraph test, which often is not even that accurate. You know, it can do it on its own. And so it'll be able to determine. This is sort of the future, you know, workplace that we will have to confront. Yeah, that's another point that they brought up. Yeah, it's also very creative to test someone's critical thinking through playing a game with the AI. Exactly, right? And so they've developed lots of different ways where you can assess, you know, how someone will perform. And if you talk to some of these personality psychologists, industrial psychologists, they will tell you your cognitive capability, your intelligence, is probably the most important predictor, which, you know, predicts how a person is going to perform at their job, right? And so if an AI program can assess that, you know, by having you play a game with it, you know, companies are going to take advantage of this. I think this is the future. I think this is where we are headed. I don't know what role humans are going to play in the future. It looks like it's going to be pretty limited. You know, this stuff is not right around the corner. I don't know. Some predict that it is. Some predict that machines will be able to outperform humans in almost every task, you know, within the next decade or so. I don't know how true that is. It's coming. It's in our future. It will eventually arrive. When it does, you know, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, so we'll have to see. So just to complete this lecture, so some of the things that you can do to assess the potential of an employee and to select among the list of candidates that you have is you can actually administer tests. There's lots of tests that employers might give to potential candidates. Of course, you know, an AI program sufficiently capable with the right kind of software might be able to, you know, perform all of these tests. so that you can more accurately assess the capabilities of potential employees. But when machines will take over the job market, I doubt the money will be distributed to everyone who lost them or who could have had them. Yeah, and so that's going to be the challenge. And so as people lose jobs to machines, and it becomes more and more difficult for workers to find jobs, right? There's going to be this sort of transition period where it will be difficult for some people, right? And you know, some of the policies that are floated in order to combat this are ideas like a universal basic income. Maybe we're at the point where we are so productive that we can just pay everyone an income, like a minimum income, so that you can survive, that you can sort of subsist on a bare minimum. So this way, if you're not able to find a job, right, because you've been automated out of the workforce, that doesn't mean, you know, that you'll be unable to survive, right? So that's sort of one idea that's floated out there. Eventually, you know, we'll reach the point where it's just such a large number of people that, right, we will have to rethink, you know, whether capitalism is the right kind of economic system. Capitalism is not a workable system when everyone's automated out of a job, right? And so this is sort of the central premise of Karl Marx's thinking, is that eventually the machinery is going to overtake all of the jobs that humans do, and capitalism doesn't work, you know, when that's the case. And so we'll have to rethink the economic system at that point. And I think, you know, eventually we'll be forced to, we will have no choice but to rethink the economic system. The challenge is going to be the transition to that point, right? It means a lot of people are going to likely suffer, you know, in the process. Communism in America, I mean, I think once you get to a point where so much of what someone can do is done by computers and in a superior way by computers and AI, you have no choice, I mean, but to adopt a different kind of economic system. And Karl Marx, you know, described communism. Communism is just sort of an idea. It isn't a prescription on how an actual economic system would be run. I mean, he never really laid out an economic plan for how you manage an economy, you know, in this kind of environment where the machines are doing all of the work and there's no place, no role for human labor. You know, so we'll see. So it will be communist. I wonder if that will mean corruption. You know, I mean, look, corruption, you know, human beings are imperfect, right? We are fallible. I think corruption is always going to be with us. There is no, you know, perfect utopia. You know, I don't know that we will ever, you know, realize a perfect utopia. Who knows? I mean, we would have to change our biology, I think, significantly before we get to the point where, you know, people are infallible and you eliminate all kinds of corruption and wrongdoing. Also, what if robots gain consciousness and rebel against working for the sake of humans? Human AI as a country leader, maybe. Look, yeah, this is the dystopian vision, and I'll tell you what, there are a lot of very serious thinkers who talk about this possibility, right? There's, you know, there is no guarantee that this AI, who's eventually going to exceed us, both physically and cognitively, mentally, that they are going to serve the interests of human beings, right? They are going to be superior beings compared to humans. And what does that mean? You know, because right now, sort of human beings are at the top of the food chain, right? When you look amongst the animal kingdom, we've dominated everything and everyone. We've completely dominated the planet. What happens when, you know, we develop, you know, a new kind of being, this AI that's far more capable than us? You know, do we become ants to them? You know, and the consideration we give to ants is that the consideration they would give to us, right? And so there is this dystopian vision of a future where AI has these capabilities. And there are serious thinkers who have considered this idea. Elon Musk is one of them. The reason why he established OpenAI, which is a nonprofit organization, and Neuralink, is because he's very concerned. He thinks that AI is the biggest threat to humanity. It could signal or could mark the end of humanity. I don't know how true that is. Some people who take this idea seriously think that the only way forward in a future where you have this AI capability that is far superior to all of the capabilities of human beings is we have to merge with the AI, right? We have to, and so Neuralink that Elon Musk's company is developing is the first step in this approach to merging with the AI technology. And when you merge with AI, where you actually connect with the computers, right, it enhances all of our cognitive capabilities, right, so that we are able to develop, in sync with the AI, right? So it doesn't leave us behind. It increases. And it does that by literally tapping into our brain, right, and improving on our cognitive capabilities. So Ghost in the Shell, yeah, I mean, this all comes back to some of our early ideas on VR. I think this is part of the bizarre future, right? Where reality is going to be very, very different, in the near future. I don't know if it's going to arrive in our lifetimes or not. There's the possibility that it will. Again, there are very serious thinkers who suggest that this time will arrive at some point in our lifetimes. I don't know how true that is, but there is certainly a future that we have to confront where our sense of reality is completely changed, that we adopt virtual elements that may completely replace physical reality, that we merge with technology in order to enhance our capabilities and leave behind, our sense of what it means to be a human, right? So there may be an evolutionary change in our species, and we become more technological. Who knows? I mean, these are radical changes that people are thinking about. I think these ideas are serious. I think it's important to consider. And as we approach that unknown future, there are lots of consequences today for organizations, one of which is how AI might, replace workers and the struggle that they will face when they find it very difficult to get a job. And so these are sort of policy ideas and decisions that we need to make collectively as a society to deal with this. As managers, the adoption of AI and the displacement of workers is something that you're going to have to contend with. So this is part of the, maybe scary for some. I mean, scary probably for most, if not everyone, but certainly interesting. Right? There is an interesting future, I think, ahead, which makes it exciting. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it all develops. So it looks like we are approaching the end here. And so I just wanted to end real quickly on the last part before we wrap up, which is compensation. And just real quickly, so, part of what, part of your human resource strategy, obviously, is to compensate employees. And so just a couple of sort of facts that you need to know about how compensation works. So compensation is the total pay that you receive, and that includes not just your base pay, so the actual salary or wages that you are paid, but also incentives that a company may offer you in the form of, let's say, bonuses, things like this, commissions, or profit sharing plans. So a lot of these tech companies, a big component of the compensation that they pay out is incentives. So your bonuses and profit sharing could be more than twice your actual base pay. And then benefits. And benefits are usually, it's not clear exactly how many benefits you get as an employee because they're not directly paid to you. But benefits are things like healthcare that a company offers you, or like retirement benefits, also their contributions to Medicare or Medicaid as well. And your textbook makes the point, a couple of points. And let's see how much time we have. It is 5:20, so we are approaching the end. So a couple of things I think that are interesting is that benefits actually make up 30% of the total compensation that workers are paid. And this is probably a surprise to most people, right? Because you don't see those benefits paid out to you. You know that you have health insurance, but you're not quite sure exactly how much that health insurance costs, right? So you don't know how much of a benefit you're obtaining from that. And so they point, and another thing that they point out is that because so much of this is invisible, workers get paid a lot more than they believe they are. And they point out that the average wage in this country is $35 an hour, which is a lot, right? And it struck me as, why all of the discussion about the economic struggles, the inequality that exists in our society, the poverty that exists in our society, when the average worker in our country is getting paid $35 an hour. It seems like there wouldn't really be much of an issue, an economic issue. And so I think what this glosses over is sort of a statistical anomaly when you deal with something called measures of central tendency. And that is when you want to describe a set of data, right, like the wages that workers receive, and you describe that data using a mean, that mean will hide the inequality that exists in the data, right? So when they say that the average worker gets paid $35, there's a lot of inequality in the wages that are paid to workers. And so because of that inequality, this mean that they use is not an accurate measure of the central tendency of the data set. It hides all of the inequality that exists. And so the typical worker is not actually receiving $35 because of that inequality. A better measure to show what the average worker is actually getting paid is not the mean, but rather the median. And the median is if you were to list all of the salaries that everyone gets paid and you order it numerically from highest to lowest, the median is the person who gets paid right in the middle of that data set, right in the middle of that list. And so the median salary, I think, is a better measure of what the typical worker will get paid. And the median is a lot less than that $35. It's actually under $20. And so I think, and this is something that they didn't point out in the textbook, and I think it was important to mention, it's not quite as rosy, the economic picture for workers as the textbook would lead you to believe. The median, I think, wage better captures what the typical worker is getting paid. And their wage is less than $20 an hour. That's the median wages. And they get very little benefits compared to the higher paid workers. So I just wanted to point that out. I think we have reached the end of our lecture. So I think there's one last question here. With the socialist regime, then there wouldn't be a price system because there are no price mechanisms on our economic decisions, like how much to produce with. So yeah, I mean, so these are all of the challenges in alternative economic system. So what I would point out is that part of the things that's misleading or misrepresented about Karl Marx and his ideas is that he didn't actually prescribe a specific economic system within socialism or communism. I think if you still have scarcity, I think it's very clear that you need a price system. And so you can still have a price system, you can still have a market system, even if you have a communist system. That is outside the scope of this lecture. It's something I would love to talk to you about, but we may have to table that, unfortunately, for another day. I would just leave you, though, with the idea that there is a workable alternative to capitalism when that day arrives, when AI has completely displaced the need for human beings to work. I can't prove it right now because we're out of time, but maybe that's a conversation we'll have at another point. So if anyone has any questions, we will wrap it up here. And thank you again, and have a great week. And I will see you next week. But I'll hang around for a couple of minutes here if anyone has any last questions. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Yeah, have a great week. Have a great rest of your day.